This is the application of science on policy failure learning in two of the major frameworks of the policy process. Assumptions are typically used as commonly understood foundations for theories in any field of study, but easily can be inconsistent and unuseful to argue for or against due to their foundation being made up from personal belief, patterns, and experiences. Typical assumptions that can be made are that humans will act rationally, that all institutions will interpret a theory or policy in the same way, and that all persons will be considered fairly no matter their position in a trial. Post-positivism highlights the limitation of scientists' ability to remain objective in research and to perform analyses perfectly. We can apply this to organizations and street-level bureaucrats in the policy process. The state of Florida's Stand Your Ground law shows how heuristic-based assumption about human behavior and institutional fairness can lead directly to policy failure. This study was done on 306 cases in Florida from its effective date in 2005 up until the end of 2012. Here we have the three assumptions again, the first being that people can make rational threat assessments. However, in the study, they saw that bias and subjective perceptions of reasonable fear was apparent. And we also can apply this to street-level bureaucrats or other means of enforcement of how they perceive reasonable fear. The second assumption, that legal actors will interpret the law the same. Vague terms such as reasonable and imminent produce high variation in police, prosecutor, and court decisions. Again, we have a policy implementation failure of what the Stand Your Ground law is defined as. And the third assumption, that institutions will be neutral, proven otherwise by the disparities across racial and socioeconomic groups. In public policy, we see this as structural policy failure and can open the opportunity to double loop learning. Falsification is the method that scientists use to falsify or disprove hypotheses rather than prove a single correct method. These ideas or hypotheses are judged by how well they stand against attempts to disprove them. From a post-positive orientation, we can reframe policy failure as a failure to reject a hypothesis on how the issue or problem can be solved. Two reasons for policy failure as defined by Birkland are the accurate theory of causation and Ambiguities of implementation. These two explanations for policy failure can be exacerbated by political or partisan incentive. In 2024, a meta-analysis study viewed the effectiveness of social and emotional learning programs in California. These are research-based programs that showed significant outcome on 1st to 8th grade students. $122 billion of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 was allocated towards K-12 education after the COVID-19 pandemic in hopes to address pandemic-related student needs. This helped launch SEL programs in many schools. Despite the overwhelming support in research, there's a lot of critiques and backlash against SEL programs in schools. SEL intervention programs are banned or limited in at least 8 states as of 2023 and face heavy oppression by parents across the country. We see the two explanations for policy failure here, the first being the accurate theory of causation. In parents and other actors, misjudgment of causal links between SEL and woke culture or ideological bias led to political resistance and implementation failure of the programs in these states. As for the Ambiguities of implementation, there was critiques of the uneven or inconsistent implementation among teachers in these programs. However, CASEL stated that SEL intervention is designed to fit the needs of its cultural context in order for it to be the most effective. Evidence supports that SEL intervention is not representative of policy failure, but rather implementation failure. We can apply these scientific concepts to two major frameworks within the policy process, first being the Advocacy Coalition Framework, or the ACF. Coalitions form around shared beliefs shaped by heuristics, identities, and values. We can relate these beliefs to assumptions if we define assumptions based on our own bias by experience and values. Evidence provided to these coalitions is interpreted through their beliefs, mostly their deep core beliefs, and these deep core beliefs don't change. However, policy-oriented learning may occur when evidence challenges secondary beliefs but not the core beliefs of the coalition. As for the narrative policy framework, or the NPF, narratives simplify complex issues into heuristic structures on the assumption that people will understand the role of a hero, a villain, and a victim. Similar to the ACF, the NPF takes evidence and shapes how stakeholders will perceive policy problems and solutions to their story and their goals. Evidence is interpreted through narrative frames, and persuasive stories often outweigh empirical data. Fire hosing and other political methods can outshine these evidence-based findings. And that's it.